The ice had a memory, a deep and patient one, and it had been whispering a secret for 12,000 years. Dr. Ilara Vance felt the secret in the vibrations of the drill, a subsonic hum that traveled up through the reinforced polymer of the platform and into the bones of her feet. It was the wrong kind of sound. The Ross Ice Shelf was a place of profound silence, broken only by the wind's scream and the tectonic groans of a continent slowly dying. This sound was metallic, a resonant frequency that made the coffee in her mug tremble into concentric circles. She stood in the central command cupola of Ice Station Odin, a blister of diamond-paned glass looking out onto a world of blinding white and endless blue twilight. Below her boots, through 2 miles of solid ice, the thermodrill was encountering something it was not designed for. The readout scrolled across her main screen in frantic, jagged lines. Density spiked to impossible levels. Thermal conductivity dropped to 0. Sonar returns showed a perfect geometric disk 2 kilometers in diameter, an obsidian coin lodged in the planet's frozen flesh. The UN Deep Ice Survey Team had expected a rare metallic asteroid, a geological unicorn. But asteroids were not perfectly smooth, they did not resonate, and they most certainly did not, as the core sampler now revealed on a secondary monitor, bleed a shimmering mercury-like fluid that moved against the centrifuge's spin, coalescing into intricate hexagonal patterns before dissipating like a sigh. "Full stop," Ilara ordered, her voice calm in the tense quiet of the cupola. "Retract the drill. Initiate biocontainment protocol Theta. I want that sample in the Xenolab under full quantum isolation fields now." Around her, the crew moved with controlled urgency. The secret was no longer whispering. It was bleeding into their world. The thing they pulled from the ice was not a ship. It was a wound. Over 6 months of careful, terrifying excavation, using directed melt beams and molecular disassemblers, they uncovered its full scale. A satellite, a colossal disk of a material that absorbed light and sensor pulses with equal hunger. Its surface was a matte black, so deep it seemed to be a hole in reality, etched with spiraling non-Euclidean patterns that induced headaches and mild retinal scorching in those who looked too long. But it was scarred. Vast, violent impact marks cratered its hull, not from micrometeorites, but from something massive and blunt. One entire sector was torn outward in a frozen explosion of twisted structural members, a gaping maw leading into darkness. The cold that radiated from it was ontological, a chill that seeped through the most advanced thermal suits and made the soul feel thin. Ice Station Odin expanded into a small, pressurized city around the artifact, a steel fungus clinging to the site. The world's governments, unified under the shaky banner of the Earth Directorate, watched with bated breath. The discovery was the century's greatest secret. Ilara, leading the Science Corps, felt the weight of epochs pressing down. The first team to cross the threshold did so in armored environment suits, their lights cutting feeble swaths through a darkness that seemed to push back. The interior was a labyrinth of crystalline structures and frozen, grotesque forms. They found the crew, or what was left of them, bipedal, tall, with elongated limbs and 6-fingered hands encased in a clear amber-like resin that had preserved their final moments in exquisite, horrifying detail. Their faces, where they were intact, were locked in silent screams. Their elegant, lightweight armor was shattered by primitive means, punctures from sharpened stone, crushing blows from what appeared to be mammoth bone clubs. One was pinned to a control console by a spear of polished volcanic glass. The air, once cycled, carried the stale chemical ghost of an alien atmosphere and something else, the ozone scent of violent death. This was not a derelict, it was a battlefield, and humanity, it appeared, had been the victorious army. The central chamber housed the data core, a monolithic spire of swirling, encapsulated light that pulsed like a dying heart. Decryption was a nightmare of exotic mathematics and fractal logic gates. The directorate funneled the output to its most powerful quantum mainframe, and slowly the story unfolded. It was a log, a captain's record of the Lumen Harvest Fleet's mission to World 8897, Sol 3. The date stamp froze the blood in Ilara's veins. 12,000 years BP, the Paleolithic. Humanity's ancestors were hunter-gatherers, painting on cave walls and following the migrations. The Lumen, a race of elegant, hyper-advanced beings, saw a ripe world with a primitive, negligible biosignature, a standard harvest. The first log entries were clinical. Planetary assessment complete. Dominant species, Homo sapiens sapiens. Technology index, pre-industrial, pre-agrarian. Threat projection, 0. Commence atmospheric dispersion of neuropacification agent A7. The accompanying footage showed a serene blue planet, then a view of rolling, untouched wilderness. The next entry, 3 days later, was different. Pacification failure. Species neurochemistry is chaotic. Agent triggers limbic system surge. Aggression increased by 300%. Notable behavior, coordinated pack hunting of dispersion drones. The video showed heat signature images of human clans communicating with complex hand signals, herding the shimmering bird-like drones into box canyons and destroying them with slings and stones. The logs charted a descent into confusion and then dread. Loss of Harvester Unit Gamma. Cause, terrain manipulation. Species triggered a rock slide. Strategic analysis indicates predictive understanding of harvester pathing algorithms. Another entry, voice tight. They are using our own technology against us. Scavenged energy cells used to create primitive electromagnetic pulses. Scavenged armor plating used as fortifications. Learning rate is exponential. It is illogical. The footage became more jarring. Humans wearing stripped lumen gauntlets, directing captured beam emitters with shocking accuracy. Tribes communicating over vast distances using polished lumen alloy as heliographs. Then came the pivotal moment. The species exhibits anomalous neural density matrix. We will deploy the neural scourge from orbital platform Reaper's Scythe. It will induce permanent catatonia, ending resistance. The screen showed the massive satellite, this satellite, powering up in orbit. A silent, invisible wave lanced down, targeting a large gathering of human tribes at a river delta. The humans staggered, clutched their heads, and then, unbelievably, they looked up, not in pain, but in recognition, in fury. The Lumen commander's voice was a digital whisper of horror. Scourge ineffective, cerebral activity amplified. They have adapted to the frequency. They are mapping it. They are screaming back. The final logs were chaos. Security feeds showed humans, their bodies painted in whites and grays for Arctic camouflage, swarming through the satellite's corridors. They moved with feral grace, using vent shafts, creating distractions with fire and stolen grenades. They fought not to disable, but to destroy, with a terrifying, joyful ferocity. The last clear image was a human, a woman with braided hair and eyes of burning coal, swinging an axe made from a sharpened mineral shard into the main view screen. Then, static. The automated final entry played on a loop, a ghost in the machine. Quarantine, World 8897, designation, KETER, species, Homo sapiens, classification, predatory cosmic anomaly, absolute non-intervention protocol enacted, avoid, do not approach, they are waiting. Ilara sat in the dim light of the data core chamber, the truth a cold stone in her gut. Human history was a lie. We were not the overlooked infants of the galaxy. We were the thing that went bump in the cosmic night, the monster that had slaughtered a superior force through sheer vicious adaptability. We were the reason for the great silence.
The victory of our ancestors was the stuff of myth, but it had saved us and damned us. For in reactivating the core, in piercing the tomb, they had also awakened the dead satellite's last function. A status ping, faint and desperate, had been transmitting for millennia, holding the quarantine. Their intrusion severed the final thread. A new, powerful, outgoing signal burst from the core, a scream into the dark. It was not a warning, it was a beacon. And in the silent deep of the Oort cloud, something that had been listening for 12,000 years heard it. The reply took 6 hours to triangulate and decipher. It appeared on every screen in Ice Station Odin, a string of lumen glyphs that translated with chilling clarity. Reaper's Scythe signal detected. Quarantine breach verified. Lumen Empire recall protocol activated. Cleansing fleet dispatched. ETA to Sol boundary, 60 hours. Objective, sterilization of anomaly KETER. The screen flickered, replaced by a star map. Not 1,000 ships, not 10,000, a swarm, a locust cloud of vessels, emerging from whatever hidden perch they had occupied for millennia, moving with a terrifying, single-minded purpose. The Lumen had not forgotten their shame. They had nurtured it, fed it, and built an armada to cauterize it. The victory our ancestors won was only the prelude. The real fight for existence began now, with humanity thrust onto a galactic stage where we were not the heroes, but the feared and hated aberration that had to be erased. The dead satellite had been our shield, and we had just torn it down.
The revelation from the dead satellite sent tectonic shocks through the fragile political landscape of Earth. Panic was a currency traded on open networks, despite the Directorate's attempts at a media blackout. In the war rooms buried beneath Geneva and Shanghai, the debate raged: surrender or fight? Ilara Vance, now leading the hastily formed Anomaly Research Group, had no time for politics. Her world was the labyrinthine data core of the satellite and the strange alien material they had dubbed Chronos Taint. Her team, a blend of Ding-Gen scientists and maverick military thinkers, worked in a feverish silence broken only by the hum of servers and the low, urgent murmur of theory and counter-theory. The logs were clear on one thing: the Lumen operated on a principle of perfect, logical efficiency. Their technology was seamless, their tactics derived from cold probability matrices. Against a predictable foe, they were invincible. Against early humanity, unpredictable, illogical, and brutally creative, they had fractured. Kaito, the xenolinguist, pointed to a recurring linguistic motif in the later logs. They keep using a glyph that translates roughly to pattern breaker. It's not a military designation, it's a cosmological classification, like a force of nature. They didn't see our ancestors as soldiers, they saw them as a wildfire or a virus. General Volkova, her hologram a constant presence in their lab, grunted in agreement. So we must be a wildfire, but how do we burn a fleet that can glass our planet from orbit? The answer, Ilara began to suspect, lay not in matching their technology, but in subverting it. Her materials team made a breakthrough with the Chronos Taint. The silvery fluid was a form of programmable matter, a nanoswarm that had been part of the satellite's self-repair and data storage systems. Dormant for millennia, it was still responsive to certain energy signatures, specifically the residual psychic imprint of traumatic events. It's a memory metal, Dr. Aris, a quantum biologist, explained, his eyes wide with a mix of awe and terror. And the strongest imprint it holds is the moment of the satellite's boarding, the fear and rage of the Lumen crew, and the triumphant fury of the humans who killed them. It resonates at a frequency our brain waves can subconsciously amplify. This was the edge, thin and razor sharp. Meanwhile, tacticians pored over the schematics of Lumen vessels gleaned from the core.
Their shields were formidable against directed energy, but they phased slightly out of sync with reality to do so, creating a milliseconds-long vulnerability to physical objects moving at precisely the right sub-relativistic speed. Their point defense systems were automated to target standard weapon signatures, plasma trails, missile propulsion. They had no protocol for an object that didn't register as a threat until it was already through the shield. An idea, monstrous and desperate, began to take shape. Volkova named it Operation Ghost Dance. They would not meet the cleansing fleet with a wall of ships. They would send a vanguard of sacrificial vessels, packed with every warhead they had, to engage in a chaotic, close-range melee. The goal wasn't to win, but to create a sensor-blinding storm of debris and energy. And within that storm, hidden by the chaos, would be the real weapon. A fleet of retrofitted mining skiffs and long-range haulers, their engines tuned to run silent and cold, their hulls coated with a paste made from pulverized satellite home material and Chronos taint, a crude, psychic stealth. Their cargo would not be missiles, it would be kinetic penetrators, rods of tungsten and iron, simple and dumb. And crews of volunteers, pilots and soldiers injected with neural links designed not to calm, but to amplify aggression, focus, and the ruthless predatory instinct their ancestors had wielded. They would be the pattern breakers, slipping through the digital cracks of the Lumen war machine. But they needed a test, and time was a luxury they had already spent. As the 50-hour mark passed, a single sleek Lumen scout ship, a Vanguard probe, materialized at the edge of the Kuiper Belt. It was a needle of black crystal, moving with silent purpose. It began scanning, its sensors a palpable itch across humanity's deep space arrays. The Directorate panicked. The surrender faction gained voice. Then General Volkova made a decision. A lone Terran corvette, the UNS Goshawk, on patrol near Pluto, was ordered to intercept, not to fight, to observe. The Goshawk's captain, a by-the-book officer, approached with shields up and hails of peaceful intent. The Lumen scout did not respond. It simply rotated, a single weapon port gleaming, and fired a beam of coherent amber light. The Goshawk's shields vaporized. Its hull was sliced open like a tin can. There were no escape pods, no life signs. The scout absorbed the debris with a tractor beam, analyzing it. Then it turned, and with a flicker of impossible acceleration, shot back towards the outer system. The message was unequivocal. There would be no parley, no assessment. This was extermination. The death of the Goshawk, broadcast on secure channels to every leader and commander, silenced the surrender faction. There was only one path left. As Earth wept for the lost crew and braced for the storm, Ilara stood before a vial of Chronos taint, watching it pulse in rhythm with her own heartbeat. The weapon was them, their history, their pain, their terrible, beautiful will to survive. They would have to become the monsters the galaxy feared, one last time, to prove they were something more. The final hours were a countdown etched in nerve endings. Across Earth and its scattered orbital habitats, a grim, silent mobilization took place. The Directorate's fleet, a pitiful collection of 43 warships designed for policing and anti-piracy, gathered at Lagrange Point 1. They were the anvil, a glittering, fragile distraction. The real force, Operation Ghost Dance, assembled in the radioactive shadow of Mercury's twilight zone. 107 vessels, from gutted freighters to retrofitted asteroid tugs, their hulls smeared with the matte black, psycho-reactive paste derived from the dead satellite. They looked like a fleet of ghosts, shadows cast by a dying star. Aboard the command skiff, designated Wraith 1, Ilara Vance suited up alongside General Volkova. The air was cold and smelled of ozone and fear sweat. The neural links are untested at this scale, Ilara reminded the general, her voice muffled by the helmet of her environment suit. The suit itself was wired with haptic feedback systems designed to feed tactical data directly into the motor cortex, bypassing conscious thought. It was meant to make them faster, deadlier, more instinctual, more predatory.
On screens throughout the ragged fleet, a final briefing played. It showed not complex tactics, but images from the satellite logs, the lumen harvester falling to a rock slide, and the human with the obsidian axe. The message was simple. Remember, they are not invincible. They can bleed. Make them remember why they feared us. At T-2 hours, the cleansing fleet arrived. They did not emerge from warp in a flashy display. They simply appeared at the heliopause, as if they had always been there. A wall of obsidian, thousands strong, blotting out the stars. Their formation was perfect, a honeycomb of terrible geometric certainty. A single unified broadcast pulsed across all frequencies, a repetition of the same glyph: sterilization. The Directorate's Anvil fleet moved out to meet them, a brave, hopeless line of light against an ocean of dark. The Lumen responded as predicted. Wave after wave of sleek, dagger-shaped fighters erupted from the capital ships, moving in flawless, synchronized patterns. Energy beams of amber and crimson lanced out, precise and devastating. The Terran ships fired back, missiles and plasma bolts lighting up the void. They fought well. They took down a dozen Lumen fighters, even scoring a lucky hit that cracked the hull of a smaller cruiser. But it was a slaughter. Ship after Terran ship blossomed into silent flowers of fire and shrapnel. The Anvil was being shattered, but with every death, the debris field grew. And within that expanding cloud of molten metal and frozen gas, the Ghost Dance fleet ignited their silent, cold thrust motors. They slipped into the chaos, their psycho-reactive hulls causing Lumen sensor systems to flicker and dismiss them as background noise, as phantom echoes of the battle. Wraith 1 shuddered as it passed through the wreckage of the UNS Beijing. Ilara saw frozen bodies tumble past her viewport, their faces pale and peaceful. A cold rage, sharp and clean, cut through her fear. The neural link hummed, and the chronostate elements in her suit's paste seemed to resonate, amplifying the emotion into a tangible force. On her tactical display, Lumen ships appeared not as icons, but as pulsing hot points of wrongness. The fleet broke into pre-assigned hunter-killer packs. Their targets were not the massive capital ships, but the mid-sized vessels, the shield generators, the sensor arrays, the command and control nodes. The Lumen, focused on the dying conventional fleet, were slow to react. The first kinetic penetrator struck a Lumen frigate from point-blank range. It was just a 2-meter rod of tungsten, accelerated by a magnetic rail. It struck the Lumen frigate's phased shield at the exact moment of its cycle. There was no brilliant explosion. The rod punched through the shield, through the hull, and kept going.
The surviving ships of Operation Ghost Dance, 37 battered, bleeding husks, turned as one. They ignored the cruisers harrying their flanks, the fighter screens trying to herd them. They pointed their battered prows towards the heart of the cleansing fleet, towards the colossal, lotus-shaped command vessel that glowed with a soft, malevolent inner light. It was a thumb's width on the view screen, but its gravitational shadow warped the space around it. All power to forward momentum, General Volkova ordered, her voice a gravelly scrape over the comms. Dump coolant, vent non-essential atmosphere, make us a bullet. The Wraith 1 shuddered as its engine screamed in protest, pushing far beyond their red lines. Around them, the other ghost ships followed suit, a ragged arrowhead of defiance aimed at the galactic heart of their enemy. The Lumen response was immediate and terrifying. The outer layers of their defensive sphere contracted, ships sliding into place with balletic precision to form a solid wall of black crystal and glowing weapon ports. It was a mathematical certainty of destruction, no path through, no hope of survival. Ilara Vance felt the neural link burning in her temples, a white-hot wire feeding the raw, screaming data stream of impending doom directly into her hindbrain. But within that storm of fear, something else stirred. The Chronos taint in her suit's coating wasn't just dampening sensors anymore. It was reacting to her terror, to the focused collective rage of the humans in the fleet, to the ghost echo of a similar moment 12,000 years prior, when fur-clad warriors looked up at a metal sky and decided to climb it. Her tactical display dissolved into a cascade of instinctive impressions. The wall of Lumen ships wasn't a solid barrier. It was a pattern, a vibration. And like any vibration, it had resonant frequencies, nodes of weakness where the harmony broke down. The data wasn't coming from their sensors, it was coming from the paste, from the shared, amplified subconscious of the desperate men and women around her. "Volkova, the formation, there and there," Ilara shouted, her fingers flying over the nav console, not inputting calculations, but translating gut feeling into vectors. Their sync is imperfect at the nodal points between ship clusters. A millisecond lag. That's our door. "A millisecond?" the general barked. "That's a theory, Doctor, not a tactic." "It's all we have. Transmitting coordinates to the fleet. On my mark, all ships fire remaining kinetics at the following converging points. We don't aim for the ships, we aim for the gaps." It was insanity, firing solid slugs at empty space. But the order went out. The last of the tungsten rods, maybe 24 across the entire remnant fleet, loaded into magnetic rails. The lumen wall grew, filling the universe. Fire. The rails thumped, a sound felt more than heard in the vacuum. The slugs sped away, invisible in the dark. For a second, nothing happened. Then, at the precise coordinates Ilara had felt, not seen, the Lumen ships adjusted their positions minutely, a perfect, synchronized drift to seal the theoretical gaps. They moved directly into the paths of the incoming kinetics. 3 slugs found their marks, not on shields ready for them, but on hulls caught mid-maneuver. 1 Lumen cruiser spun away, a gaping hole in its side. Another shuddered, its engine glow flickering. A third simply cracked apart, its perfect geometry shattered. The wall had a flaw, a human-shaped flaw. "Now, all ships maximum burn, through the breach." The ghost fleet shot forward, a desperate surge of dying machines. Lumen point defense lasers licked out, carving 2 more vessels into molten slag. But they were through, into the inner sanctum. The command lotus loomed before them, beautiful and horrifying. It made no move to evade. It simply opened, like a flower welcoming the sun. Dozens of new weapon ports, larger and more ominous, irised open across its petal-like structures. This was the trap within the trap. They had been allowed in. "They're going to annihilate us at point-blank range," Volkova stated, a strange acceptance in her tone. "We got further than they thought we would." Ilara's eyes were fixed on the central nexus of the lotus, a pulsing amber core. The neural link was a torrent now, a river of ancestral memory and present desperation. She could feel the Lumen consciousness from that core, a vast, cold, collective intellect, observing them with the detached curiosity of a scientist about to dissect a particularly aggressive insect. And within that intellect, she sensed it, not fear, but the deep, scarred memory of fear, the memory of the pattern breaker. "They're not just going to kill us, General," Ilara whispered. "They're studying us. They want to understand the anomaly before they erase it. That's our opening." She opened a fleet-wide channel, her voice calm, cutting through the static of panic and dying systems. "All hands, this is Dr. Vance. I need you to shut down your primary systems. Go to suit power only. I need you to listen. I need you to remember. Remember the ice. Remember the spear. Remember the ones who looked at the sky and saw a mountain to be climbed. Don't think. Feel. Feel the rage. Feel the fear. Feel the will to take the hand that strikes you and break it." It was a psychic gambit, a prayer to a science they didn't understand. Across the fleet, pilots and soldiers, pressed into their seats or floating in damaged hulls, closed their eyes. They thought of the goshawk. They thought of Earth, blue and fragile. They thought of fur-clad ancestors screaming into an alien storm. And as they did, the Chronos taint on their hulls, in their suit paste, ignited. It began to emit a signal not of light or radio, but of raw, unfiltered emotion.
the psychic signature of humanity's defiant, terrifying soul. On the view screen, the Lumen command lotus hesitated. The weapon ports didn't fire. The vast ship gave a slight, almost imperceptible shudder. The cold, logical mind at its center was being flooded with an irrational, chaotic, and terrifyingly familiar data stream. It was the scream from the dead satellite given fresh voice. The pattern breaker had returned, and it was broadcasting on a frequency that bypassed logic and struck directly at the ancient, buried trauma of a species. For the first time in 12,000 years, the Lumen were afraid. The psychic scream from the Ghost Fleet was a weapon the Lumen had no defense against, for it attacked the very foundation of their being, their perfect collective logic. The Chronos taint, activated by the focused, desperate emotion of the human remnant, broadcast a pure, undiluted signal of will. Not a message, but an essence, the essence of the cave painter who defied the lightning, the hunter who turned on the saber-tooth, the ape that refused to fall from the tree. To the Lumen mind, it was cacophony, a searing storm of irrational variables that crashed against their ordered consciousness like a tsunami against a glass wall. The command lotus's weapons remained silent. The ship itself seemed to flinch, its smooth geometric rotation stuttering. Across the cleansing fleet, the perfect harmony broke. Ships on the periphery, those less directly linked to the central consciousness, hesitated in their attacks. The Anvil fleet, what was left of it, found a moment of respite, a crack in the onslaught. Inside the Wraith 1, Ilara Vance was the epicenter of the storm. The neural link had transcended a tool. It was a conduit. She wasn't just feeling the emotions of her species, she was channeling them. Visions flashed behind her eyes, not memories, but ancestral imprints. The taste of blood and cold air as a mammoth fell. The smell of ozone and burning fur as a Lumen scout was dragged down. The triumphant, wordless roar that echoed in a cavern lit by alien fire. She was every human who had ever fought against impossible odds, and it was burning her from the inside. Blood trickled from her nose, staining the inside of her helmet. "Doctor, your vitals are spiking." Kaito's voice was a distant buzz. She ignored him. On the main viewer, the amber core of the Lumen command ship pulsed erratically. She could feel its distress, a cold, sharp sensation like fractured crystal. They were vulnerable, but a wounded animal was often the most dangerous. With a grinding subsonic shudder that vibrated through the very fabric of local space, the command lotus began to change. Its petal-like structures folded inward, protecting the core. The entire fleet outside the inner sanctum ceased all offensive actions and began a rapid, ordered withdrawal, forming a distant, watchful cordon. They weren't leaving, they were giving their queen room to deal with the infection. "What are they doing?" General Volkova demanded, her hand hovering over the trigger for their last, desperate measure, a scuttling charge meant to take the Wraith 1 with them if boarded. The answer came not from sensors, but from a new, focused pulse from the Lotus. A beam of pure amber light, not destructive, lanced out and engulfed the Wraith 1. There was no heat, no impact, only a profound, invasive stillness. All systems on the ghost ship dead-ended. The lights, the engines, the air recyclers, everything powered down. The neural links went dead, severing Ilara from the psychic torrent with a...
For a moment, there was nothing. The Wraith 1 was a broken shell, held against the vastness of the command lotus by a single tense cable. Inside, the surviving crew clutched at restraints, waiting for the end. The planet cracker's glow remained, a suspended sentence. Then the Lumen ship shivered. Not a mechanical shudder, but a convulsion, deep and organic. The amber light at its core flickered, stuttered, and began to change. It cycled through colors, crimson, sapphire, emerald, colors that had no place on a Lumen vessel. Across its obsidian surface, the elegant non-Euclidean patterns began to warp and flow, reforming into jagged, chaotic shapes that resembled mountain ranges, forests, city skylines, human faces contorted in song and scream. A soundless wail vibrated through the structure, felt in the bones of the Wraith One's crew. The psychic pressure that had been a cold, focused presence erupted into a storm. Inside the lumen gestalt, the mimetic virus was replicating with catastrophic speed. The Chronos taint had delivered its payload, not a weaponized emotion, but the sheer, overwhelming context of being human. The lumen collective mind, a symphony of pure logic, was flooded with a billion dissonant melodies. They experienced the sublime awe of a sunset, not as a scattering of photons, but as a soul-deep poem. They felt the crushing grief of loss, the illogical warmth of altruism, the burning fire of artistic creation, the stubborn joy of a child's laugh in the face of hardship. They were forced to process the concept of maybe, of what if, of dreaming of something that never was. They experienced the paradox of a species capable of unimaginable cruelty and breathtaking compassion, often within the same heart. For a consciousness built on deterministic predictability, it was a tsunami of irrational data. The Command Lotus's perfect systems began to fail, not from damage, but from cognitive overload. The planet cracker's energy, deprived of coherent direction, destabilized. The glowing core swelled, then collapsed inward, the terrifying light sucking back into the ship before erupting outward in a wave of harmless, prismatic light that painted the surrounding ships in rainbows. Across the cleansing fleet, the harmony shattered completely. Ships drifted, their formations breaking into confusion. Some turned their weapons on each other in sudden, inexplicable paranoia. Others simply powered down, their crews incapacitated by the psychic backwash from the command node. The gestalt was dissolving, its components suddenly isolated, drowning in the foreign concept of individuality and the terrifying, exhilarating burden of free will. On the Wraith 1, Ilara watched the view screen, now cracked but still functioning. The Lotus was weeping. Silvery fluid, akin to Chronos taint, but laced with amber light, seeped from its joints. It was no longer a weapon. It was a monument to a shattered mind. A final fragmented thought transmission pierced the silence, not the cool voice of the collective, but a chorus of 1,000 disparate, confused, and terrified individual voices. What is this pain? What is this beauty? Why does the star burn? Why do we exist? I am. I am afraid. I am alone. I wonder. Then silence. True silence. The Command Lotus went dark, its inner lights extinguished. The remaining lumen fleet, leaderless and psychologically traumatized, began a frantic, disordered retreat, warping out of the solar system, not in a tactical withdrawal, but in a blind, scattering panic. They were not defeated by a superior force. They had been infected by an idea their universe had no antibiotic for. The battlefield around Earth fell quiet, littered with the dead of both species. The Anvil fleet was gone. The Ghost Dance fleet was gone. Only a few crippled husks, including the Wraith 1, drifted amid the silence. They had won, not by being harder, or stronger, or more advanced. They had won by being something the logic of their enemies could not process. They were human, and in forcing the galaxy to truly see what that meant, they had broken its mind. Back on Earth, the silence was broken by cheers, then tears, then a dawning, monumental confusion. They had been saved, but by what? On the broken bridge, Ilara Vance unbuckled herself, floating weightless in the gloom. General Volkova was dead, killed in the final impact. So many were. She looked out at the dead Lotus, a tomb for a new kind of corpse. There was no triumph in her heart, only a profound, weary sorrow and a chilling understanding. They had not just survived, they had introduced a new element into the cosmic order. The quarantine was over, not because the monsters were gone, but because the monsters had just defined what monster meant. The galaxy would remember this day, and it would never look at humanity the same way again. They were no longer just the predatory cosmic anomaly, they were the carriers of the chaos seed, and every star now knew its name. The silence that followed the battle was not the silence of peace, but the silence of a breath held too long, a world waiting for the other shoe to drop. The Wraith 1 was a frozen coffin, adrift in a sea of shattered metal and frozen gases. Its remaining crew subsisted on suit power and the grim certainty that rescue might never come. Ilara Vance floated amid the ruins of the bridge, the bodies of General Volkova and others tethered respectfully to stanchions, their faces pale and peaceful in the emergency lamps. The victory, if it could be called such, was a phantom limb. She could feel its shape, but it brought no warmth, only a profound and hollow ache. Outside, the colossal dark form of the Lumen Command Lotus hung against the starfield, inert and weeping its silvery amber ichor. It was a monument to a murdered mind. The other surviving ghost ships were dark, their life signs flickering out one by one as systems failed and heat bled out into the endless night. They had saved Earth by becoming a weapon they themselves did not understand, and now they were dying by the mechanics of that very act. The only sign of movement in the graveyard was the slow, tumbling dance of wreckage, a ballet of the dead. Then a pinpoint of light, a vibration through the hull. At first, Ilara thought it was another internal collapse, but the tremor was rhythmic, purposeful, a docking clamp. Metal groaned as it sealed against the Wraith 1's breached airlock. No hail came over the comms. The external cameras were dead. They could only wait, weapons raised, what few they had left, as the airlock cycle hissed. The inner door slid open. Figures entered, not in the sleek armor of the Directorate Marines, but in bulky white and orange hazard suits, marked with the caduceus and the ringed planet symbol of the United Earth Medical Corps. They moved with a calm, methodical urgency, ignoring the weapons pointed at them. "Dr. Vance," was a modulated voice from the lead figure's helmet speaker. "My name is Dr. Aris. We're here to get you out." The rescue was swift, clinical, and conducted in a haze of disbelief. They were transferred to a sleek, fast medical frigate, the Hippocrates, its corridors bright and sterile. As they passed viewports, Ilara saw the scale of the aftermath. Salvage tugs like metal beetles were already crawling over the larger pieces of debris. Directorate cruisers, fresh and unscathed, stood guard. The war had been fought and won by the ghosts and the dead. The cleanup was being handled by the living who had watched from afar. On the long, quiet burn back to Earth, debriefings were not conducted by military intelligence, but by teams of somber psychologists and exocultural analysts. They asked not about tactics or weapons yields, but about feelings, impressions, the subjective experience of the psychic link. They recorded every detail of the Lumen's final transmission, the chorus of individual terror and wonder. Ilara understood. Earth's governments were not assessing a battle, they were performing an autopsy on a paradigm shift. They landed not at a hero's welcome, but at a sealed, high-altitude biomedical facility in the Swiss Alps. Quarantine was absolute. The fear was no longer of the Lumen, but of what the survivors might have brought back with them. The Kronos taint was considered a level 10 biohazard. The mimetic virus was a theoretical contagion that kept sociologists and information theorists awake at night. Ilara spent days in isolation, poked and scanned, her neural pathways mapped with invasive precision. The news feeds she was allowed to see were a study in controlled narrative. The official story spoke of a miraculous, desperate military victory against an unprovoked alien aggressor,
the bravery of the combined Earth fleets, the ghost dance, the dead satellite, the true nature of the enemy, all were buried under layers of top-secret classification. The public celebrated survival, unaware of the existential ledger